Iran Daily Briefing. Sunday, April 12, 2026. 21 hours of direct talks in Islamabad ended this morning without a deal. The United States and Iran negotiated through the night in Pakistan, the first face-to-face talks between the two countries since 1979, and walked away blaming each other for the failure. What happens to the fragile ceasefire that made those talks possible, and what happens to it next, remains unclear. We'll have the full picture after the headlines. This is Iran Daily Briefing. For Sunday, April 12, 2026. The Islamabad talks were the centerpiece of this week, and this morning they collapsed. A 2-week ceasefire that came into effect on April 8th held long enough for both delegations to sit across from each other for the better part of a day. But it wasn't enough. Today we'll walk through what happened inside those talks, what both sides are saying publicly, and what the breakdown means for several connected stories: the Strait of Hormuz, Lebanon, and the human cost inside Iran. We'll also look ahead at what the next 48 hours may bring. The Islamabad talks marked the first direct US-Iran negotiations since 1979, France 24 reports. They were held at the Serena Hotel in Islamabad on Saturday, April 11th, according to Al Monitor. US Vice President J.D. Vance led the American delegation. Iran's side was led by Parliament Speaker Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf and Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi, according to Middle East Eye. France 24. Middle East reported the Iranian delegation numbered approximately 70 members, though this figure comes from a single report and has not been independently confirmed. The talks lasted more than 21 hours. They ended without an agreement. Both sides have since blamed the other. Vance said Iran refused to accept American terms, specifically a commitment to refrain from developing a nuclear weapon. He described the US offer as their final and best offer, according to Al Jazeera and Al Monitor. Ghalibaf, for his part, stated that the US failed to gain the trust of Tehran's delegation, Al Jazeera reports. Al Jazeera also reported that Iran had said, going into the talks, that it did not expect a deal to be reached at the first meeting. That caveat matters. It suggests Tehran may have viewed this round less as a closing session and more as an opening position. There is an important complication sitting behind the negotiations. France 24 reports that Tehran had stated it would not engage fully with the US until Israel halts its bombing campaign in Lebanon. That condition, and whether Washington is willing or able to address it, remains unresolved. Pakistan's Foreign Minister Ishaq Dar urged both sides to uphold the ceasefire agreement, Al Jazeera reports. The ceasefire itself came into effect on April 8th, according to Al Monitor. The conflict it paused, according to ACLED conflict tracking data, as reported by Al Monitor, began on February the 28th, roughly 6 weeks before talks began. In those 6 weeks, ACLED recorded at least 7,700 strikes, or series of strikes, by missiles, drones, rockets, or bombs, Al Monitor reports. That is the scale of what the ceasefire interrupted, and what a renewed breakdown could restart. The sticking points, according to Middle East Eye, included Iran's nuclear program and control of the Strait of Hormuz. On the nuclear question, Washington's demand appears to be a formal Iranian commitment to not develop a nuclear weapon. Iran's position, based on what Ghalibaf said publicly, is that the US has not done enough to build trust. What to watch? Whether either delegation signals a willingness to return to the table, and whether the ceasefire holds now that talks have broken down. Pakistani Foreign Minister Dar's appeal to both sides to maintain the ceasefire will be worth tracking in the hours ahead. The Strait of Hormuz. While diplomats were still in Islamabad, separate developments were unfolding in the Strait of Hormuz. President Trump posted on social media on April 11th that the US military had begun clearing mines from the strait, Al Monitor reports. France 24 separately confirmed that Trump said the US military had started that operation. That would mark a US military operation inside the waterway, during an active ceasefire, a notable step while negotiations were still ongoing. At the same time, shipping data cited by Al Jazeera showed 3 supertankers laden with oil exiting the strait. That movement suggests some commercial traffic is resuming or attempting to resume, even as the military situation remains unresolved. And the head of the International Maritime Organization, the UN body that oversees global shipping, stated in an Al Jazeera interview that Iran must not charge tolls in the Strait of Hormuz. The toll question was one of the disputes Middle East Eye identified as a breakdown point in the Islamabad talks. What to watch? Whether the US mine-clearing operation continues or pauses following the collapse of the Islamabad talks, and whether commercial shipping movement through the strait increases or reverses in the coming 24 hours. Lebanon sits at the intersection of 2 conflicts that are now increasingly entangled. Lebanese authorities reported, according to France 24, that Israeli strikes killed more than 1,150 people in Lebanon, including more than 350 on the first day of the US-Iran ceasefire. A figure from a single report that has not been independently confirmed in today's available intelligence. That number and the timing, with strikes reportedly continuing on the very day the ceasefire began, is directly connected to Iran's stated precondition for talks. Tehran said it would not negotiate with Washington until Israel stops its campaign in Lebanon. The Islamabad talks went ahead anyway, suggesting Iran ultimately chose to participate despite that condition not being met. The talks then failed. Whether Tehran now re-invokes that precondition as a reason to delay future negotiations is a live question. What to watch? Any statement from Iranian officials linking the Lebanon situation explicitly to the conditions for resuming US-Iran talks. The human toll inside Iran. A note on sourcing. Before this section, the figures here come from Iranian state-affiliated media and cannot be independently verified. Jafar Miadfar told Mehr News Agency, as reported by Middle East Eye, that 2,115 people under the age of 18 were injured in the conflict, including 724 children under 5 and 24 under the age of 2. Miadfar also said most US-Israeli attacks were concentrated in the provinces of Tehran, Khuzestan, Lorestan, Isfahan, Kermanshah, and Ilam. Middle East Eye also reports that strikes hit Shahrazad Sharif University of Technology in Tehran on April 7th, the day before the ceasefire came into effect. These are single-source figures from state-affiliated media. They are reported here because they represent the only source data on casualties inside Iran available in today's intelligence. Listeners should weigh them accordingly. What to watch? Whether independent organizations, human rights groups, UN agencies, or international media with access on the ground begin to publish their own casualty assessments. We opened this morning with the question of what happens next, to the talks and to the ceasefire. Here is what the intel supports. The ceasefire came into effect April 8th. The talks in Islamabad lasted more than 21 hours before breaking down on April 12th. Both sides have publicly blamed the other. The core disputes, Iran's nuclear program and the Strait of Hormuz, were not resolved. Pakistan's foreign minister has called on both sides to maintain the ceasefire. Iran had stated before talks began that it did not expect a deal at the first meeting. That is where things stand. No second round has been announced. No third-party mediator has been confirmed. The ceasefire remains in place for now, but it has no diplomatic agreement behind it to keep it there. Here is what to watch in the next 24 to 48 hours. On the talks, watch for any signal from either Washington or Tehran about whether a second round is being considered. Vance called the US offer final and best. That language typically closes a door, but Ghalibaf's framing that the US failed to build trust, not that talks are permanently over, may leave one open. Listen for follow-up statements from both delegations. On the ceasefire, The ceasefire now exists without the diplomatic process that was supposed to sustain it. Watch for any military incidents in the strait or in the broader conflict zone that could test whether both sides are still observing it. On the Strait of Hormuz, Trump announced the mine-clearing operation on April 11th. Watch for confirmation of whether that operation is continuing, suspended, or completed, and whether Iran responds publicly to it. On Lebanon, Tehran's precondition linked its willingness to negotiate to Israel halting strikes in Lebanon. With talks collapsed, watch for any Iranian statement that reactivates that linkage or any Israeli statement about the status of operations there. On Pakistan's role, Islamabad hosted the talks and its foreign minister publicly called for the ceasefire to hold. Watch for any follow-up Pakistani diplomatic activity. Pakistan's role as a facilitator may become more significant if direct talks stall. Today's briefing covered the collapse of US-Iran peace talks in Islamabad after 21 hours without agreement, the ongoing situation in the Strait of Hormuz, including a US mine-clearing operation, the casualty toll reported in Lebanon, and the human cost of the conflict inside Iran. We'll be back tomorrow with developments as they come. If you found today's briefing valuable, subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. New episodes every morning.